Spider-Man is one of the most popular superheroes of all time. He needs no introduction. And just like any character that's popular, they get their face slapped onto any product known to man, one of those being video games. The first Spider-Man video game released in 1982 for the Atari 2600 and was actually the first video game based on a Marvel character and the second superhero game, right behind Superman, who also had a game on Atari. From there, Spider-Man would continue to release multiple games throughout the 80s and 90s, all made by different developers, and as a result, all over the place in terms of quality. It wasn't really until the 2000s, after Activision picked up the license, when Spider-Man games started to pick up in quality, starting with a game simply titled Spider-Man, which released for all major platforms in 2000 and was the first 3D Spider-Man game. It was released to positive reviews and sold pretty well, which prompted a sequel to be released a year later. I felt like playing them recently, no specific reason, I just felt like it, and decided, why not make a video about them? So today, let's check out Spider-Man and its sequel, Enter Electro, and see if they still hold up. Spider-Man begins at the Science Expo 2000, where a reformed Otto Octavius is giving a speech demonstrating his new invention, and in the crowd are two photographers, Peter Parker and Eddie Brock, the secret identities for both Spider-Man and Venom respectively, for those who aren't in the know. However, somebody impersonates Spider-Man and goes onto the stage, getting past all of the security guards and stealing Otto's newest machine. Peter tries to change into his costume to get Otto's stuff back and clear his name, but is unable to change in such a large crowd, and as a result is framed for the robbery. Eddie tries to get pictures of the crime, but the Spider-Man imposter destroys his camera, putting him in a state of rage and bringing out the Venom symbiote, declaring they'll get revenge on Spider-Man and get rid of him once and for all. Finally, the mastermind behind this plan covers the city in fog in order to get anyone off their tracks. With all that backstory out of the way, it's finally time for the game to begin, with the first question being, how does the game feel to play? Spider-Man can run and jump, which behaves just like how you'd expect them to, and in terms of combat, he can alternate between either kicking or punching enemies for combat, as well as press the Y button to shoot webbing at them. He can also pull off different moves with his webbing by pressing different directions on the analog stick, which are required to finish certain parts of the game. These moves I found to be pretty hard to pull off. A lot of the time my inputs wouldn't register properly, and I just end up doing something I didn't want to. There's also the wall crawling, which also isn't great. For whatever reason, I'm guessing the camera, Spider-Man will sometimes go in the complete opposite direction of where I'm trying to get him to go, to the point where I have to stop moving for a moment so the controls can reorient themselves. Like I said, it doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it's really annoying. This game's web swinging also isn't the greatest. It isn't physics-based like the Spider-Man games afterwards, so he just floats over to where he's supposed to go. The web swinging will also just not work sometimes. Sometimes there will be no buildings for Spidey to latch onto, but he'll still be able to swing, but there's also times where the inverse happens and there's buildings nearby, but when I try to swing, nothing happens and I just die. Thankfully, pressing L1 on your controller shows this target that tells you what areas you can and can't swing to, as well as help you swing to a specific area. I found it to be very useful and even required to finish certain sections of the game. Despite these hiccups, I otherwise found Spider-Man to be just fine to play as. Not as fun as later Spider-Man games, but still solid. Now as for the game itself, the first level has Black Cat inform us that the Jade Syndicate is robbing a bank and has taken hostages. So we have to get to the bank, defeat some goons, and head inside. Once we're there, it's a stealth mission. Take out all the enemies while keeping the hostages safe. The level ends with us having to get rid of a massive bomb that the robbers placed before it blows up. We do this by throwing it inside of a safe and closing the door, but for whatever reason, there was a glitch that caused the bomb to slowly slide out of the safe. I had to throw it back in because it got out, and even then, it was still hanging through the door when I got rid of it. After that, we get a call from J. Jonah Jameson, who says he's being attacked by the Scorpion, who wants revenge on Jonah for getting him stuck in his suit all those years ago. The next level has the player rush to the Bugle's offices before Scorpion gets to him, before we have a boss fight against him, the first one in the game. It's pretty simple, just make sure to hit him at the right times while making sure Jonah is safe from him. Following the fight, JJ calls the cops on Spider-Man, of course, and he flees. While fleeing, he comes across Daredevil, who is able to use his powers to determine that Spider-Man's innocent and says he'll make sure to spread the word about his innocence. But not fast enough, as the cops catch up to us and it's time to book it. This level isn't really good, it goes on for way too long, and there's multiple loading screens in between some sections that really break the pace. Remember how I said Spider-Man swinging just doesn't work sometimes? Yep, that's a problem here. The only real part of this level I liked was the music. This game was developed by Neversoft, the developers behind the original Tony Hawk games, and you could definitely tell by the soundtrack, which is heavily inspired by the rock music of the time, and it slaps. Spidey evades the cops, and then we meet up with Black Cat again, who informs us that Venom's taken over the New York City Jumbotron, and Rhino is at a rampage at Biotech.
What is this, the bad guy Olympics?
The two view Venom's message, stating that he's kidnapped Spider-Man's wife, Mary Jane. Yeah, remember when these two were married? He says that she only has 24 hours left to live, to which Spider-Man goes to fight the Rhino. He says that as Spider-Man, it's his responsibility to help others and not himself. Dude, he didn't steal your keys. He's gonna kill someone. It just so happens that someone's your wife. They head to Biotech, and Black Cat gets clapped, leaving us on our own to defeat the Rhino. It's pretty simple. Just make Rhino run into stuff that hurts him, and you're golden. Although one thing that really annoyed me is that there were a couple times where I defeated Rhino, but also killed myself at the same time, so I had to restart, and that really bothered me. After that, Black Cat is taken to the hospital.
Perfect.
Okay, maybe not. And it's time to save Mary Jane. We chase Venom around the city before having a boss fight against him. I can't get too close to him, or he'll whoop me, but I also can't be too far away from him, or he'll whoop me. The only way to defeat him without getting hurt is by launching web balls at him, but like I said earlier, these moves are kinda hard to pull off, which makes the fight a bit annoying. The fight also goes on too long since I can only get a few hits on Venom before he teleports away from me and I have to wait for him to reappear. Yeah, I sure remember Venom's iconic teleporting ability from the comics. After defeating him, he flees into the sewers and we tag along. The next level has us chasing after him, but we're not alone, as we meet up with some enemies in the sewers that are actually experiments of the lizards. We don't actually see them in the game though, we'll have to wait for the sequel to see that. There's also these sections of the level taking place over bottomless pits, and the target system I mentioned earlier comes in really handy here. I don't think you'd be able to finish this level without it. The next level has us catch up to Venom on a subway train, where he sends waves of enemies to attack us, and our goal is to not die before we get to the end. I found myself having to retry it a few times, either because the game would spam 2 enemies for me to handle at once, or I'd be attacking an enemy at the edge of the train, and since punching and kicking causes Spider-Man to move forward a little bit, I'd accidentally fall off. The next couple of levels are just more of the same, just going around the sewers beating up enemies, although water is introduced as a hazard here. We eventually get to Venom, who has Mary Jane tied up in a water bank that's slowly filling up. The goal of the boss fight is pretty much the same. Use web balls on Venom to get his health down, but now we have to turn off these switches so that MJ doesn't drown. It's a really cool boss fight that I actually found to be creepy. Venom can teleport just like the last fight, so you're always on edge anticipating where he'll strike next, only for him to jump out right in front of you, and since he looks like this in the game, it's actually a little scary when he shows up. Peter defeats Venom and tries to tell him that he's innocent, bringing up how Peter and Eddie bumped into each other when the fake Spider-Man was robbing the Science Expo. Okay, so Venom's not only murderous, but he's also stupid. Venom apologizes, frees Mary Jane, and the two make a truce to help stop whoever's behind the robbery, and decide to check the Daily Bugle's files to see if there's any clues they can find. While searching, Venom claims that he can sense Carnage nearby, another symbiote like him, and ditches Peter to try and find him. Turns out, Eddie was onto something, as multiple symbiotes start swarming the offices. Peter learns the symbiotes are being generated by these machines, and the next couple of levels are just him heading farther and farther down the Bugle's offices and destroying symbiote generators. I found the symbiotes to be really annoying to fight. You're gonna get hit way more times than they are when you attack them, and they were frequently a cause of death for me. Thankfully, you do get a power-up that allows you to shoot fire webs that basically insta-kills them, but I still decided to avoid the symbiotes unless it was absolutely required to fight them. While destroying the generators, he ends up coming across the fake Spider-Man that framed him earlier. He catches up to him, where we learn that it was Mysterio pretending to be Spider-Man, meaning it is now boss fight time. The fight is pretty bad. You have to defeat him by slinging web balls at specific areas at him, which requires you to stand still, but almost all of his attacks require you to move quickly, and there isn't a lot of time between those attacks to hit him. Also, there were some times where I aimed perfectly at Mysterio, but sometimes it wouldn't register as a hit. After defeating Mysterio, Spider-Man interrogates him, where he learns that he's working under another criminal and that his master plan is to launch a symbiote invasion where he'll rule them all. Spider-Man, knowing that nobody can control the symbiotes, asks Mysterio where his boss is, to which he tells him to go to an old abandoned warehouse, which even Stan Lee thinks is cliché.
Ah, the cliché seedy waterfront warehouse.
We go deeper and deeper through the warehouse, eventually going into an underwater lab, where we find the machine that's been generating all this fog the entire time, as well as Black Cat, who is drugged and imprisoned by some of the main villain's goons. Peter frees her and destroys the fog machine, leaving it up to him to defeat this plan's evil mastermind, which turns out to be Doc Ock. What a shock! He faked his reform and has been working with Carnage to create a world of human symbiote hybrids. What follows is 2 boss fights, one against Doc Ock and another against Carnage, because Venom just couldn't finish the job. They're pretty fun, and in the case of Carnage, pretty challenging, and the closest thing this game has to a traditional final boss fight. You'll see what I mean in a moment. So, with Doc Ock, Carnage, and all the other villains defeated, along with all the symbiote and fog generators destroyed, it seems like all is well and Spider-Man can return home. But the Carnage symbiote has one more trick up its sleeve.
What's up? Is that Ock?
To the people that played this game as kids, I am so sorry. The final level has a very simple objective. Run away from whatever that is. It's a really intense chase, not only because you're being chased by this, but also because it's actually pretty hard to keep off the Doc's trail. A great way to end the game. Spider-Man evades Doc and an explosion, which somehow he barely survives. Venom and Black Cat call over Captain America to help give Spider-Man a ride, and they all get out of there. With the days saved, Spider-Man and Black Cat attend a small get-together with some other superheroes, the villains rot in jail, and since the Bugle can't let Spider-Man take a dub, they falsely report that Spider-Man and Doc Ock were in cahoots and that it was Captain America that stopped their evil plan. And that Spider-Man, it's pretty solid overall, despite some PS1 jank and frustrating moments. 8 out of 10. Like I said earlier, this game got a sequel a year later, Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro. However, this had a completely different developer than the last game, Vicarious Visions, and wasn't as well received. I've also never really seen it be talked about nearly as much as the first game, so I'm a little worried we might have a stinker on our hands, but hey, don't knock it till you try it, right? So let's move on to Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man 2 begins with a cutscene where the game's main villain, the Wall, Spider-Man 2 begins with a cutscene where the game's main villain, Electro, breaks into a biotech lab and steals the BioNexus device. A device capable of amplifying its user's energy to power a whole city block, but in his hands, it's powerful enough to make him a god. Meanwhile, Spider-Man is doing his normal thing, and after a quick tutorial level, comes across Electro and his goons trading the briefcase with the stolen goods. He places a tracer on Electro, but is spotted by his henchmen, and the next level has us fight them, as well as fix any property damage they caused. The next level is a very basic one, where we swing from point A to point B while avoiding enemies before we catch up with Electro at an old warehouse. Spider-Man arrives just as he leaves, but sticks around long enough for his henchmen to fight him, which is what the next level consists of. Fighting henchmen. Spider-Man interrogates one of the thugs who tells him that Electro's going to Hangar 18 on an airfield. He gets ready to leave, and is then ambushed by Shocker, who is our first boss and first challenging section of the game.
Fight like a man, Bug.
The next level has Spider-Man on his way to an airfield, where he has to defuse a bomb planted in the city as a distraction. It's pretty challenging and keeps you on your toes. The keys to defuse the bomb are placed in random places, so each run of this level is always going to be different, which is another thing I really like about it. The next part of the game has Spider-Man sneak into the hangar where, once again, he just barely misses the criminals he's chasing after and is forced to save a runaway plane. The game doesn't do a very good job explaining what to do in order to stop the plane, which had me restart the level a few times, but it's decent. After that is another level where we have to go from point A to point B, followed by another level where we break into Hammerhead's base, which are pretty average. I am finding less and less to say about this game. The next level has Spider-Man find the villains, yeah, right as they escape onto a train. You gotta be kidding me. The next level has Spider-Man chasing the train while being chased by Sandman at the same time. The level revolves around Spider-Man avoiding his attacks while trying to get to the train, and occasionally breaking down these sand barriers created by Sandman to slow him down. It's kind of annoying that you have to stand perfectly to pick up objects while Sandman's constantly on your ass, but it's otherwise solid. Spider-Man gets onto the train to get the suitcase from the Beetle. He escapes, of course, and he gives Spider-Man an invite to the Science and Industry Ball, which Electro's henchmen break into as they want to find Dr. Watts, the creator of the BioNexus device, since she's the only one who knows how to power it. What follows is a more difficult version of that bank level from the first game. Get the hostages out and keep them safe from criminals. Although it's way harder here, these guys do not mess around. Following this is a boss fight against Hammerhead, and I gotta say, this is awful. In order to defeat him, you need to use your webs to yank his gun away from him, dodge an attack, and then hit him as many times as possible before he gets his gun back. Repeat that a handful of times, and you're golden. Yanking his gun away requires you to press Y and down on the analog stick, which, like I said with the first, the game doesn't do a very good job reading these inputs, so a lot of times when I'd press down and Y, the game would think I only pressed down, and as a result, I'd turn around and Hammerhead would start whooping me. I swear, I spent 30 minutes on this boss. It was terrible. I then proceeded to quit the game, come back a day later, and then beat it on my first try. Did I get used to the boss's BS, or was it a skill issue? Vote now in the comments below, and like and subscribe. Oh, okay, shameless plug over now. Spidey calls Dr. Watts' colleague, Dr. Connors, about the device, but only hears monstrous growling on the other end. Fearing that he's become the lizard again, Spidey bursts into biotech, which is where the next couple of levels take place, and these are rough. Both because of BS enemies and obstacles, or because of the game just not telling you what you're supposed to be doing. The worst offender is this one stage where Spider-Man has to go all the way up this machinery to get to the goal on top. They introduced a bunch of hazards that slowly makes the stage more annoying to deal with, and not only that, but you're going to be wall crying a lot in this level, and it is absolutely terrible. None of the issues with Spider-Man's controls have been addressed in this game. He plays the exact same, which wouldn't be a problem if there weren't levels like this in the game. Oh, and one more thing, this level doesn't have any checkpoints, so if you die or have a really unlucky fall, it's back to square one. Great. These biotech levels end with the boss fight against the lizard. We solve a small puzzle in order to make a cure, and the boss fight consists of the player using these purple web cartridges to stun the lizard and attack him while he's down, but not too long because he'll... Yeah. Having cured Connors, he tells Spider-Man about Electro's plans. One tedious level later, and he's at Watts' place in order to find out what powers the device, only to be attacked by Sandman. The boss fight against him is pretty challenging. Spider-Man and Electro learn at the same time that the device can only be powered by a hand-sized sapphire, and one has conveniently begun being displayed at a nearby museum. They both arrive there to get the gem, but Electro has samurais on his side that we have to fight before making a long crawl up this exhibit. Easier said than done. After breaking past all that, it's time to go one-on-one with Electro, and this boss fight goes on for way too long. I dodge his attacks, I hit him a few times, he launches me away, I repeat again and again and again until it's over. Spider-Man gets the gem, but Electro threatens Watts' life, so Spider-Man is forced to give it to him. Electro escapes and heads to a skyscraper in order to generate enough power to basically become God. The final boss has us fight him by destroying these generators and conductors, and then tricking Electro into stunning himself so that we can hit him. It's not perfect, I think Electro's attack stunned the player for too long, but it's a really solid ending to the game. I also really like that they gave Spider-Man suit damage for the final boss. No reason, I just thought it looked neat. Spider-Man saves the day, but since the Bugle won't ever let him take a dub, they falsely report that Thor took down Electro. Meanwhile, the villains rot in jail in a similar manner to the villains from the first game. Hey look, it's the villains from the first game. And that's Spider-Man 2. It's a decent game, but I didn't really enjoy it as much as the first. There are no major improvements to the controls or general gameplay, it's just more levels like the first games. But they're not nearly as good as the levels in the first game, all tied together by a story that, once again, isn't nearly as good as the first's. You can definitely tell this had a different developer than the first. 7 out of 10, it's still a good game, just not nearly as good as Spider-Man 1. Rather than making a third game in the series, Activision chose instead to make a game based on the first Spider-Man movie by Sam Raimi. And while I've never played it myself, from what I've heard, it plays very similarly to these two games, being level-to-level beat-em-ups. The following game, Spider-Man 2, would take this formula and make the game open world. And the rest is history, as pretty much every major Spider-Man game afterwards uses this formula. So while these games aren't the greatest, they've definitely shown their age with time. They're at the very least respectable for helping inspire some truly great games. Like and subscribe, a lot of you aren't, and I'll see you later. This is RAMJAM, signing off.